Hey YouTube, testing 1 2 3, 1 2 3. How's everyone on this fine Saturday afternoon? Someone logs in, they could give me a sound check, please. Hey Justin Shepard, welcome to the stream. Sound test test 1 2 3. Test test. Okay, thank you. There's a couple of settings in the video program that they change. They vary on their own. Sometimes they'll switch, and I have to stay on top of it to make sure that the sound's coming through. Otherwise, there is no sound. So that's why I'm always doing a sound check to start out with. There you go, Justin. That earned you a wrench. I have lots of moderators on my channel. There's my wonderful picture, Sans. Hey, Cody, son, welcome to the stream. That picture of that bloom without the hummingbird. My memory of Peru and not having my camera ready fast enough. What's going on with you guys today? I'm bereft of topics. I was just in Mark's live stream. He dyed his beard pink, so I thought I would go check him out. He looked pretty wild. That's something I've never considered doing, is dyeing my hair or dyeing my beard. So we're seemingly solidly into winter now, in the sense that it was well below freezing last night. We had frost here. It's on us again. Winter time always is around the corner, waiting to catch us unawares. And it behooves us as fish keepers to be ready if we can. Yes, his beard was very pink. Yeah, that's not. I was happy for my wife when she dyed her hair pink because she enjoyed it so much. But I'm not. I'm not really interested in going there. It never seems to last very long. It seems like the first time you wash it, most of it comes out anyway. So, and then you're stuck with this faded version of it until it finally all washes out or all wears out. Anyway, I think I've tried to cover preparing for winter. Um, I think there's a lot of steps that we can take. I last year the bedroom where great many of my fish tanks are is on the north side, and this house is an old house. It's over 100 years old, and it has absolutely no insulation in it at all. It's got metal siding on the outside of the wood siding on the outside, and Connor sings and pets. Y'all, I'm late, but I pick up my puppy tomorrow, and I'm so excited. Well, congratulations on getting a dog. I think dogs are great critters to have, great critters to cohabitate with. Um, I went ahead and bought an electric. Hey Pam, Pam of the pink beard. Welcome to the stream. Um, I I picked up a garage heater, a 240 uh, garage heater, because I was trying to figure out some way of heating that bedroom that would not draw more power than is already plugged into all the walls. Because one of the problems we run into as fish keepers is we far outstrip the amount of plug-ins that there are available in our house. And we use all kinds of plug-in boards so that we can add more and more. But one of the things you have to watch when you're adding more and more plug strips is how much wattage you're actually accumulating. And one of the things that accumulates the most wattage is heaters. So if you've got one plug-in with extension cords and plug strips that are powering a whole area full of fish tanks, the more heaters you plug in, the more water heaters that you plug in, the more precarious this situation becomes. And so I have a 220 air conditioner in the window to help keep the room cool in the summertime. And I thought to myself, well, I don't use that 220 that unit's plugged into during the winter time because I seal the air conditioner up and don't use an air conditioner in the winter time. So I thought, well, I could get a 220 heater and just switch. During the winter time, I'll run a heater, and so I mounted it on the wall, the north wall, and I just switch the plug out. I unwire it from the air conditioner plug, and I wire it to the heater plug in the wintertime. And that really made a lot of difference. Now, it's an area heater. It's made for like a garage. You know, if you wanted to put heat in your garage, if you have a 220 outlet in your garage, you can plug that unit into it and run it. Actually, it's a 240 heater, but I've only got it on 220. But it still gets plenty warm enough in a bedroom to help warm the room. And I've got it near the window because that's where most of the cold air comes in at, and it's on the north wall. So it fires up when the temperature drops below 74 degrees. Now they recommend that unit be mounted in the ceiling. Welcome to the stream, VB23. Welcome to the stream, Not Nola Jane. So HC Aqua Bicker hopped into his rice fish tank, so it ate all the juveniles. No rice fish for me till the next batch. Oh man. That's rough when a fish jumps from one tank to another, especially if it eats stuff in the other tank. I'd recommend lids, VB23. Try to slow down the jumping process. So they recommend that those heaters be mounted in the ceiling. So I've got mine mounted on the wall about 7 foot up. And these old houses here in the United States, old houses had ceilings that were 11 or 12 feet tall. That's, if you can see behind me, over my head, there's a high ceiling, and that's the high ceiling in the bedroom as well. And of course, cool air will fall to the bottom and warm air rises. And if you have a very tall ceiling in a room and you're running the heat in the wintertime, VB23 says, gotta treat my white clouds. They are like they are $1,000 fish. Yep, we should care for all of our fish equally, regardless of price. That doesn't always come out like that. Sometimes you will overkill treatment on a very expensive fish and just let fish go that are cheap, but they should all be treated equally. So I have that heater mounted at about 7 foot in a 10-foot ceiling area, and that's why I've got it set on 74 degrees for it to come on once it gets below 74, because the heat will stay up in that top 3-4 foot, and it has to be, if I just set it on 70 degrees, it never comes on, or it rarely comes on, because the heat is rising, the heat from the heating of the house is rising up into that ceiling, and it keeps that top 3-4 foot really warm, but then it's cooler down below. So I have it set at 74 so that it will come on and warm the air in the lower area. Hey, Fish Room Fever, welcome to the stream. And Fish Room Fever says, I find that in general the more expensive fish to be more sensitive. Well, that's true somewhat. More expensive usually means harder to get, and when it comes to things like loricard catfish, yes, the more expensive they are, the more sensitive they are. But there's a lot of tetras that are rare in the hobby that aren't any more sensitive than regular ones. You know, it depends. It depends on where they come from, what kind of waters they come from. You know, you get some of these fish that are from highly acidic waters, and they're going to be much more sensitive to water parameters probably than most fish are. Most fish pretty generally can, as long as you stay around neutral, you know, 7.5, 6.5 pH wise, they're gonna do okay. But but fish that come from highly acidic waters, pH 4.0 up to like, you know, 6, they tend to be a little bit more sensitive to things. Um, I know there's been a lot of tetras come into the hobby lately that are coming from more and more acidic water, and they are really sensitive. Fish Tropics says, I find fish that are hardened to your water are best. At this point, I treat a fish like a plant, if that makes any sense. I understand what you're saying there, Fish Tropic. Um, I think I think that the baseline that we as fish keepers should strive for is what our water is naturally coming out of our taps or wells. Um, you know, if you're in a highly urbanized area, you might be better off to run your tap water through an RO unit to get rid of some of the, a deionizing unit to get rid of some of the heavy metals that are in the water system. Um, Maybe some of the chemicals and medicines that are in it. Fisher and Fever says, I'm not disagreeing with you, by the way, Dwayne. Just trying to type while running a register. Well, keep your eye on the register, man. Hey, Joel. Welcome to the stream. Um, no, I don't disagree with you either, Fisher and Fever. I just generalizing, even in fish keeping, is kind of rough sometimes. There's always exceptions to all these supposed rules out there, so sometimes it's good to keep an open mind. Um, to Fish Tropics' point, I think that our best bet is to run with what water we have so that we're not constantly trying to um, fiddle with our water. The more fiddling you do with the water, the more difficult the situation becomes. And by fiddling, I mean adding buffers, um, uh, adding things to make the water more acidic. All of that kind of stuff just creates more work, more chances for errors. Now, RO water will work really well, and Not Nola Jane says yes, don't fight your water, and that's basically the point I'm getting to. But Nola Jane, there are not Nola Jane. There are times when you get fish that have been in native waters and then transshippers waters that are much different parameters than our own water at home coming out of our tap. So what I'm trying to say is, and if you'll watch people like Corey, they go this way a lot, is that not fighting your water can sometimes be accomplished by adjusting your fish slowly to your own natural water parameters coming out of your tap. And by that I mean like these fish from Peru that I've gotten. When I first, the TDS test of the water they were in was in a 14 to 20 range, and slowly, I have been upping the TDS of the water that they're in so that they have a chance to adjust easily. Hey, Candy, welcome to the stream. Um, so that they have a chance to adjust slowly to a change in TDS. Um, you don't want to take a fish that's lived its whole life in 20 TDS water and suddenly put it in 200 TDS water. But you can slowly, over a long period of time, add, use RO water and then add a certain amount of dechlorinated tap water to that water and slowly bring the TDS up to where at last, in the end, you can actually use your tap water and not fight your water. And by the same token, it's perfectly clear to me that there are a lot of people that are living in highly urbanized areas or areas where they are dealing with really bad tap water. Hey, Dan Slee, welcome to the stream. Um, if you're living in Flint, Michigan, I highly recommend that you do not use your tap water to keep your fish in without treating it in some fashion, without filtering it, without running it through an RO-DI setup so that you both remove everything larger than a micron and remove the heavy metals from the water. Fishroom Fever says people will also do the opposite and feel that the captive bred fish they're keeping needs its natural parameters, even though the fish has never been in those parameters. And you're right. One thing that I can recommend to you as helpful, not always, but generally helpful, when you buy a fish and it comes in water, unless that water has been so long in the bag that it is critical that you get that fish out of that water, and because it's been in the bag so long with fish, what happens is the water turns immediately toxic upon opening the bag. Yes, Pam, most fish that you buy come in water, but my point being that it can be handy to test the water parameters that your fish comes in. So if you buy from Wet Pets, then you're probably, when you test that water, going to find that that water in Oregon is much softer than the water that you would get out of your own tap if you live in the central United States or you live in the northern part of North America on the Cambian Shield, which is highly calcified water, much higher TDS, much harder water. You will find that if you test that water when your fish come in, at least TDS wise, that you get an idea of what parameters those fish were kept in before they were shipped to you. If you buy fish from out of the country that are shipped in, Dan Slee says, after dealing with inverts and water parameters, fish are so easy in comparison. At least it feels that way. And yeah, I get you. When I first started keeping shrimp, I was scared to death of them. I was scared to death that I would change the water parameters slightly and wipe them all out. So yeah, it can be ticklish, prickly to treat water for some creatures. But if you test the water that your fish come in, then you have an idea of what the shipper that shipped you the water and the fish in the water, Pam, was keeping them in. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not dealing with a situation where fish came into from the wild to a transshipper. The transshipper immediately turned them around, changed the water, and turned them around and sent them out to you, and that you're just getting one bag of water from the shipper, the seller, as opposed to pudding. Fishroom Fever says, very good point, Dwayne. I'm going to play devil's advocate. There are still a lot of potential variables. Case in point, I saw a short in Brazil yesterday that is buffering up the water at their facility. Yep. You can get a really mixed bag. Um, there are a lot of shippers that recognize that most of the North American, and I'm just speaking about North American here, I'm not privy to what the water parameters are in Europe. I'm not privy to what the water parameters are everywhere, and it's going to vary, which is one reason why we all need to have a good handle on what's coming out of our tap. And the way to do that is to test that water. You can even collect some of that water and ship it off to a excellent testing facility that will give you a really clear picture of what's in your water. You can get a slightly clear picture from your local water department, but they're not very interested in giving you a really clear picture. And a lot of times, if you ship water off to these companies that make water treatment equipment, their interest is in telling you how bad your water is, so that you need to buy their equipment to treat your water with. So, Not Nola Jane says, I don't test nothing. I be bad. Yeah. Well, I know a lot of people that keep fish that test nothing as well. They simply go with what's in their tap. And Dan Slee says, I'm over my tap. Last time I looked at the detailed test, it was scary. Yeah. That's why in some instances, you're a lot better off using an RODI. It was better not knowing what constituted that 450 TDS. Yeah. And 450 TDS is pretty high coming out of the tap. That's pretty hard water. You know, Neocaridina shrimp might like it. But it might be a little bit hard for them too. Fishroom Fever says, my fish seem to be enjoying the growth hormones in my water. And Dan Slee says limestone quarry is main reason, but yeah, the heavy metal analysis was scary, which is why I recommend an RODI. DI standing for deionization, which uses ions to trap heavy metals and chelate them in the filter so that they do not come out into your water. Uh, it removes heavy metals from the water, and it removes other things as well. There are also other um, water particulate matters in our tap water that are not beneficial to our fish. And Fisher and Fever points to one of them, growth hormones. Um, I take 6 medications every day now. I've gotten to the stage in my life. I'm lucky enough to have gotten to the stage in my life where I need a lot of different kinds of medications to keep myself perking along. All of those medications do not stay in my body. Many of them come out and go into the sewer system, which is pumped straight to the water treatment plant and is then treated so that it can be pumped back into the water system. Nobody has enough filtration in their local facilities to remove all of those medications from the water. So the water we're getting out of our tap contains a certain amount of medications that we're all peeing into the system from taking so many medications. So there are things worse than heavy metals in our tap water, which is a good reason to run an RODI. It doesn't remove all of it, but it removes an awful lot of it and gets back much closer to pure water. Of course, it is low TDS water. Fisher and Fever says, in the U.S., water facilities are required to pass inspections, and those inspections are public record. However, who's to say the water board isn't prepping the water to those specs just ahead of the testing? Yeah, and very rarely will your water company people give you all of the information that is required to recognize what is actually in the water. They don't want to give you that information. Most governmental agencies find that the less information they give you, the better off it is for them, because then you don't have ammunition to shoot at them with. Dan Slee says, I mainly use distilled for my Caridina now and tap for my Neos, but I treat the heck out of it first with carbon. Yeah, and carbon will remove a lot of the problems, but carbon will not remove all of the heavy metals in your water. You need a deionization canister to remove all of them. And if you watch Fisher and Fever says, my chloroform level is 22 times the recommended. Yeah. And what is the recommended chloroform level in your tap water? Dan Slee says main thing is the acceptable levels for stuff. The levels that are legal aren't necessarily okay or healthy. Yeah, it's what the human body can process by taking water in drinks or in cooking is not the same thing as living in that water where you don't ever get away from it. So a fish doesn't have the option of drinking less or more water because a fish lives in water. So a chloroform level that is 22 times the recommended allowable levels for human consumption is an awful lot for a fish that lives constantly in that water. So we're talking here about not fighting your water, and yet the very water that we're talking about not fighting may be so dangerous to our fish, so toxic to them, just in its natural state, that it's not going to allow us not to fight it. So my point was that eventually you should be able to let your fish live in your normal tap water. Slowly adjust the TDS and so they don't go through some kind of severe shock. Think of the shock of a fish that's living in 4.0 pH water that's suddenly caught and shipped to a facility in the United States, and it's plunged into 200 TDS water, which is much harder water with a much higher pH. If you jump that fish from 4.0 pH to 7.0 pH in one fell swoop, you're opening that fish up to all kinds of issues. It is going to suddenly face diseases that couldn't survive in highly acidic water, parasites, all kinds of pathogens that could not survive in 4.0 water are now suddenly in the water and surviving in the water. Hey, Pleco Whisperer, welcome to the stream. That it's now in. It has no natural immunity to any of these diseases or pathogens because that water contains stuff that it has never in its life been forced to deal with. So not only are you offering that fish a much harder TDS, a much higher pH, a much more neutral or basic pH suddenly, but you're also subjecting it to a whole new range of diseases of which it has no natural immunity built up. So that fish is suddenly faced with a really low percentage of survival rate. And that's why through the years, so many angel species, angelfish, couldn't be kept in the United States because as soon as they came in from the shipper, they died. Even in the facilities where they were shipped into, no matter how clean the water was, they were faced with such a huge jump in pH, such a giant amount of new potential killers that they had no immunity built up to, no ability to fend off, that most of them succumbed. Some survived and managed to adjust, were lucky enough to build up an immunity to the pathogens, the parasites, the diseases, but very few. So it's really a mixed bag. While we say quite easily, it rolls off the tongue very nicely, don't fight your water, that's not always how it works out. Depending on where the fish come from, what kind of water conditions that they lived in, if they were wild caught or were raised in at the facilities where they were bred. You know, you go to a local fish auction, if you don't test that water that's in the bag of that fish that you got at your local auction, and you just figure that they're from the same area you are from, so their tap water must be just like yours, you are completely taking out of the equation the idea that someone in your local area is using an RODI to keep the water for the fish they've got, and you may have TDS 250 out of your tap, and the water that they prepared with their RODI system may be 50 TDS, and so you suddenly take a fish that's been living in 50 TDS and drop it in your 250 out of your tap. So I always recommend when you get fish in that you test the TDS of that water, that you test the pH of that water, and please don't misunderstand that there are situations where the fish has been in the bag for so long that as soon as you open that bag and fresh air goes into that bag and starts reacting with the water, one of the properties of a sealed bag of air and water is that only so much ammonia can be created in that bag because of its reaction with a controlled amount of air in the bag. But as soon as you open that bag, all of the potential ammonia that could have been created in that water suddenly happens, because now it's got a lot of fresh air in there to interact with, and it immediately goes heavy ammonia. Now, if that fish has only been in the bag overnight, or those fish have only been in the bag, say, 2 days, then it's not going to be as bad as it would be if those fish have been in a bag for a week in shipping, if those fish have been in a bag for 4 days shipping, you know, the packaging got delayed, the shipping got delayed, you didn't find the box on your... In any situation where the fish have been in the bag for an extra amount of time, much over a day or 2 days, that water is going to be toxic immediately after you open that bag. As soon as air goes in that bag, you're going to smell ammonia immediately. And in that situation, testing the water is not going to do you any good. 844 Mad Guy, welcome to the stream. Um, but in most cases, you know, the exception proves the rule. In most cases, generally, if the shipping has not been that long, then you can get a decent test of the water that those fish have been shipped in, and that will at least give you an idea of how not to shock them so badly, what the TDS of that water is, what the pH of that water is. Testing nitrate, nitrites, that kind of stuff is probably not going to be too helpful, because you want to think that they were put in water that didn't have a lot of nitrites and nitrates in it when they were shipped. But because they've been shipped in a bag for a certain period of time, there's probably going to be a buildup. If they've pooped in that bag, then there's going to be a buildup of nitrites, nitrates in that shipping water. So yes, you could test it with a test strip, but I would not focus in so much on anything other than pH or ammonia. I would be much more interested in the calcium test part of the test strip to show me how hard that water was. And I would be more likely to use a TDS pin on it. The things that I mainly test are TDS and temperature, and those will give you a really good idea of how to keep your fish healthiest when they first come in. And even though we sometimes have to fight our tap water because it's getting worse and worse depending on where we live, or how urbanized the area we live in, or how enlightened our water treatment facilities are, I would suggest, even if you have to use RO to meet the water parameters that the fish lived in nature in or was shipped to you in, you know, if it came from the West Coast, chances are the water's pretty soft. If it came from the northern West Coast, chances are the water's pretty soft. So if you can get closer to what the water is in the bag without going through too much falderall, then your fish will have a better, longer adjustment period. If it's a species that comes from highly acidic waters, you should know that from studying the literature, the information that's out there. Even if you're getting an unknown species, you can very often get a general idea. Dan Slee says, have to run. Thanks for the stream, Dwayne. Great points. Have a great day, all. Thanks for dropping by, Dan. Have a good rest of your weekend. I'm just trying to generally get to the point where we slowly match the water parameters that our fish either came from or came in to what we're getting out of our tap within reason. And then if you slowly bring those two variances in water together, eventually you get to a point where you don't have to fight the water that's out of your tap, and your fish will live. Now, maybe in breeding conditions, as Fisher and Fever was talking about, you should think along the lines of their natural pH from where they come from, unless of course that your fish are captive bred, in which case they've never been in the water conditions that that species comes from in the wild. And if that's the situation, then basically you just need to match what they were shipped to you in, because that's what they were bred and raised in. Someone else has kept them at those levels, and that's what you need to match, not trying to match where the species lives in the wild. Match what the breeder bred them in and what the shipper shipped them to you in. If you're getting fish from a local breeder or a breeder that's a national breeder, someone who breeds fish, then the water that you get in from them should be the water that those fish were bred in. And that's the water parameter that you should try to match. If you're getting fish in from a transshipper, in other words, they were caught in the wild and bagged up and shipped to the transshipper, and the transshipper did a water change and then shipped them on to you without doing a quarantine or anything else, just picking the dead ones out, changing the water and shipping it right on to you, then you don't really know what water quality those fish came from. You know what you get in. You can go through the literature and figure out what they lived in the wild with a general sense of, but that's a pretty particular situation. Now, most shippers don't just flip fish. They bring them in, they keep them for a while, they try to slowly adjust them up to a higher water parameter, and then they ship them. So they've quarantined them, they've medicated them, and they've slowly raised the water parameters to try to get the fish to have a fighting chance. So it pays to know your transshipper. It pays to know your company that you buy from. And by know, I mean get a hold of them and talk to them about what types of methodology they use, how long they quarantine, how they try to adjust the water parameters. All right, guys, you've listened to me ramble about water quality for 53 minutes now. If you guys have any subjects you need to broach before the end of the stream, we're coming up on the hour. The older I get, the harder it is to adjust to winter. I never really cared for winter much because I was always mostly lived in the South, and most of the areas in the southern United States don't get too harsh of winters. Some did. When I lived in Alabama as a kid, we got some pretty harsh winters there. But yes, Nisi, I did get your video of your tub and walking through your hallway. Thank you, and welcome to the stream. Are you guys getting heavy winter yet, Nisi? Um, the way things have been going here lately, it was probably colder here last night, 28 degrees, than it was there. Huh? Alaska's been getting some really strange winter. Fisher and Fever says missing the Knoxville winters, Dwayne. And the answer to that is, yeah, no winter. It was 28 degrees here the last couple of nights, Nisi. We're getting all the frozen tundra down here, and you've got our warm, sunny beaches up there in Alaska. Um, Fisher and Fever, I miss Knoxville. Winters be damned, but and they have some pretty cold, nippy winters in Knoxville. I've seen some. I sat in a dentist office on April Fool's Day getting a tooth pulled long ago in Knoxville and watched great big snowflakes fall outside. And I began to wonder if maybe the dentist had given me something that was messing with my mind. Nisi says it'll snow in California before it snows in Alaska. But there's no global warming. East Tennessee, if you don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes. Yep. I really miss Knoxville. I miss Knoxville for the people. I miss Knoxville for the mountains. I miss Knoxville for how beautiful it is there. Knoxville's one of my favorite places I've ever lived. It's not quite as high on my list as Northwest Arkansas is, but it's right up there. And yes, I miss Knoxville, but not the winters. You can keep the winters. Listen, I'm 300 miles north of you, almost straight north. If you go through the mountains, it's a straight shot. BC says the water holding tub is still empty, trying to find a place to keep it. The bonus room is now a dedicated workout room. Awesome. And the bears are still hunting. Yeah. It's climate change is affecting us all, whether we like to admit it or not. Whether the change is fearsome enough in our area to prove to us beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's happening is besides the point. It is happening. It just may not be evident to you yet. All right, guys, before I wax political, I'm going to get out of here. I hope you guys have a good weekend. I hope you have fun. Try to have fun. Fishroom Fever says, we'd love to have you back. We could use the IQ boost around here. Fishroom Fever, you can't fool me. I've got lots of friends in Knoxville, and many of them are decidedly intelligent. Some of the smartest people I've ever known come from Knoxville. So don't count Knox Patch out. All right, guys. Have a good rest of the weekend. Take care of your fish. Thanks for stopping by.